Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post. It's about time this happened. From the Washington Post, Trump administration directs all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion staff to be put on leave. It's the beginning of the end for this industry. These people are being put on leave so they can then be laid off. There is a process. But in addition to this, all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion offices are going to be closed. They're not going to work from home. They're not going to be working at all. They're going to be on leave. They're still getting paid because it's the federal government, of course, until they can get laid off. But at least it sends a clear enough message to the rest of the government. We do not want this in our normal government operations. It's illegitimate. It's illegal. And now it's stopping. From the Washington Post, President Donald Trump's administration moved Tuesday to end affirmative action in federal contracting and directed that all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion staff be put on paid leave and eventually be laid off. The move follows an executive order Trump signed on his first day, ordering a sweeping dismantling of the federal government's diversity and inclusion programs that could touch on everything from anti-bias training to funding for minority farmers and homeowners. And when they say funding for minority farmers and homeowners, they're not saying they can't get funding. They're just saying they can't get funding because they're minorities. And of course, there should be no discrimination in that. Give everybody a chance. Trump has called the programs discrimination and insists on restoring strictly merit-based hiring. The executive order on affirmative action revokes an order issued by President Lyndon Johnson and curtails DEI programs by federal contractors and grant recipients. It's using one of the key tools utilized by the Biden administration to promote DEI programs across the private sector, pushing their use by federal contractors to now eradicate them. And this is how the elimination is going to start. They're getting rid of DEI offices in federal government offices, now also in federal contractors. So if you do business with the federal government, you better stop it with these nonsense programs. And for the companies that don't get the message and don't start to follow along and go back to following the law when it comes to hiring people, they'll find themselves on the wrong side of a lawsuit from the Department of Justice. That hasn't been announced yet, but it's definitely coming. That's why they put Harmeet Dillon in the Civil Rights Division. The Office of Personnel Management in a Tuesday memo directed agencies to place DEI office staffers on paid leave by 5 p.m. Wednesday and take down all public DEI-focused web pages by the same deadline. Several federal departments had removed the web pages even before the memorandum. Agencies must also cancel any DEI-related training and end any related contracts, and federal workers are being asked to report to Trump's Office of Personnel Management if they suspect any DEI-related program has been renamed to obfuscate its purpose within 10 days or face adverse consequences. By Thursday, federal agencies are directed to compile a list of federal DEI offices and workers as of Election Day. By next Friday, they're expected to develop a plan to execute a reduction in force action against those federal workers. The move comes after Monday's executive order accused former President Joe Biden of forcing discrimination programs into virtually all aspects of the federal government through diversity, equity, and inclusion programs known as DEI. That step is the first salvo in an aggressive campaign to upend DEI efforts nationwide, including leveraging the Justice Department and other agencies to investigate private companies pursuing training and hiring practices that conservative critics consider discriminatory against non-minority groups such as white men or Asian men or any other men or other people that aren't of a certain race, skin color, or sexual preference. It's all illegal. It's been illegal. It's now going to get pursued. And for all the companies doing it, even government offices doing it, they're going to get themselves in trouble if they don't cut it out. The executive order picks up where Trump's first administration left off. One of Trump's final acts during his first term was an executive order banning federal agency contractors and recipients of federal funding from conducting anti-bias training that addressed concepts like systemic racism, which does not exist. Biden prominently rescinded that order on his first day in office and issued a pair of executive orders, now rescinded, outlining a plan to promote DEI throughout the federal government. We don't have a total head count as to how many DEI employees were put into the federal government. I haven't seen a good number on it. I'll cover that number on this channel when we find out. While many changes may take months or even years to implement, Trump's new anti-DEI agenda is more aggressive than his first and comes amid far more amiable terrain in the corporate world. Prominent companies from Walmart to Facebook have already scaled back or ended some of their diversity practices in response to Trump's election and conservative-backed lawsuits against them, in addition to boycott threats. Those threats actually work quite well against these big companies. Here's what Trump's going to be removing. Here's a look at some of the policies and programs that Trump will aim to dismantle. Diversity offices, training, and accountability. Trump's order will immediately gut Biden's wide-ranging effort to embed diversity and inclusion practices in the federal workforce, the nation's largest at about 2.4 million people. Biden had mandated all agencies to develop a diversity plan, issue yearly progress reports, and contribute data for a government-wide dashboard to track demographic trends in hiring and promotions. The administration also set up a Chief Diversity Officers Council to oversee the implementation of their DEI plan. The government released its first DEI progress report in 2022 that included demographic data for the federal workforce, which is about 60% white, 55% male overall, and more than 75% white and more than 60% male at the senior executive level. For anyone that actually cares. If they can do their jobs, we're happy to have them, no matter what their sexual preferences are. Trump's executive order will toss out equity plans developed by federal agencies and terminate any roles or offices dedicated to promoting diversity. It will also include eliminating initiatives such as DEI-related training or diversity goals in performance reviews. So when someone is looking to improve at their job or maybe get even a better job in the federal government, they won't be asked to sign on to their ridiculous racist ideology. Trump's executive order also paves the way for an aggressive but bureaucratically complicated overhaul of billions of dollars in federal spending that conservative activists claim unfairly carve out preference for racial minorities and women, which of course they do. It's fine. You don't have to say that these people allege this. It's the Washington Post, so they're going to say things like that. That's exactly what they do. The order does not specify which programs it will target, but mandates a government-wide review to ensure that contracts and grants are compliant with the Trump administration's anti-DEI stance. It also proposes that the federal government settle ongoing lawsuits against federal programs that benefit historically underserved communities, including some that date back decades. Trump's executive order is a seismic shift and a complete change in the focus and direction of the federal government, according to Dan Lennington, a deputy counsel for the conservative Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, which has pursued several lawsuits against federal programs. The Institute recently released an influential report listing dozens of programs the Trump administration should consider dismantling, such as credits for minority farmers or emergency relief assistance for majority black neighborhoods. He did acknowledge that unwinding some of the entrenched programs can be difficult. For example, the Treasury Department implements housing and other assistance programs through block grants to states that have their own methods for implementing diversity criteria. Can those states be held accountable for following the law when they implement those block grants? I would expect yes, they could, especially if the Department of Justice helps out. It's not clear whether the Trump administration will target every initiative that stemmed from Biden's DEI executive order. For example, the Biden administration banned federal agencies from asking about an applicant's salary history when setting compensation, a practice many civil rights activists say perpetuates pay disparities for women and people of color. It took 3 years for the Biden administration to issue the final regulations, and Trump would have to embark on a similar rulemaking process, including a notice and comment period to rescind it. That's according to Chirag Bains, former deputy director of the White House Domestic Policy Council under Biden, and now a non-resident senior fellow with Brookings Metro. Noreen Farrell, executive director of gender rights group Equal Rights Advocates, said that she was hopeful that the Trump administration, quote, will not go out of its way to undo the rule, which she said has proved popular in some states and cities that have enacted similar policies. And Biden's DEI plan encompassed some initiatives with bipartisan support, said Bains. For example, he tasked the Chief Diversity Officers Executive Council with expanding federal employment opportunities for those with criminal records. Because what you really want is a lot of criminals in the federal government, as many as you can possibly get. And of course, don't ask them what they made at their previous job, because that wouldn't be fair. Just give them multiple six-figure salaries, incredible benefits, and allow them to work from home. That's what the Biden administration essentially did. That initiative stemmed from the Fair Chance Act, which Trump signed into law in 2019 and bans federal agencies and contractors from asking about an applicant's criminal history before a conditional job offer is made. That initiative stemmed from the Fair Chance Act, which Trump signed into law in 2019 and bans federal agencies and contractors from asking about an applicant's criminal history before a conditional job offer is made. As long as the contractor and the government have an opportunity to look into that person's history before they make a job offer, that's no problem. Bain said that's what Biden's DEI policies were about, ensuring that the federal government was structured to include historically marginalized communities, not institute reverse discrimination against white men. And if it happens to do that, oh well, who cares? Well, it's illegal, so you can't do that, and that's why it's getting reversed. Despite the sweeping language of Trump's order, Farrell said, quote, "The reality of implementing such massive structural changes is far more complex. Quote, federal agencies have deep embedded policies and procedures that can't simply be switched off overnight," she added. Well, yes, you can switch them off overnight. All you have to do is tell the DEI staff, you no longer work at this office, you're all on leave until we can get you all laid off. And that's exactly what Trump did. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.